She thought she'd won when the billionaire chose her over his black ex-wife. At the charity gala, she publicly humiliated the woman she believed was powerless. But when the truth came out in front of everyone, her laughter turned to horror. Some victories aren't what they seem. If you love stories about karma and justice, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Hit that like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever seen someone get their comeuppance this dramatically. Let me paint you a picture of Vivian Torres, a woman who carried herself like royalty even when the world treated her like she'd been dethroned. 2 years ago, she was Mrs. David Sterling, wife to one of the most powerful tech billionaires on the East Coast. Today, everyone believes she was just another discarded ex-wife, desperately clinging to the remnants of a life that no longer belonged to her. But here's what made Vivian different from every other woman in her position. She never once begged, never once made a scene, never once tried to win David back publicly. While other scorned wives might have hired private investigators or leaked stories to the tabloids, Vivian simply disappeared into her work. She threw herself into her law practice with a focus that was almost unsettling. People whispered that she was in denial, that she couldn't accept her marriage was over. They had no idea how wrong they were. Enter Isabella Whitmore, a woman who believed she'd won the lottery of life. Blonde, connected, and blessed with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no, Isabella had seemingly swept David Sterling off his feet. She wasn't just his girlfriend, oh no. She made sure everyone knew she was so much more than that. She was his plus one at every gala, his companion at business dinners, his arm candy at charity events. Isabella had a way of making her presence known wherever she went. Designer everything, perfectly styled hair, and a laugh that could cut through the noise of any crowded room. But more than that, she had this need to make sure everyone understood that she had replaced Vivian Torres in every way that mattered. It wasn't enough for her to have David. She needed everyone to know that she was better than the woman who came before her. The thing about Isabella was that she didn't just want to be David's new woman. She wanted to erase Vivian entirely. At dinner parties, she'd make little comments about David's past mistakes. At charity luncheons, she'd mention how much happier David seemed now that he was with someone who really understood him. She had this way of talking about Vivian like she was a cautionary tale, a learning experience that David had thankfully moved past. David, for his part, seemed like a man who'd found his groove again. He was focused, successful, and appeared genuinely content with Isabella by his side. When people asked about his divorce, he'd give vague answers about growing apart and different life goals. He never badmouthed Vivian, but he also never defended her when others did. His silence spoke volumes, or so everyone thought. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala was Isabella's Super Bowl. This was her chance to play hostess at the event that bore David's name, to show the entire city's elite that she wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his partner in every sense of the word. She'd been planning her outfit for months, coordinating with the event planners, making sure every detail screamed, "I belong here." But here's what Isabella didn't know, what none of them knew. Vivian Torres wasn't fighting to get her old life back because she'd never actually lost it. While Isabella was busy playing house and posting photos on social media with captions like, "Home is wherever you are," Vivian was quietly, methodically, brilliantly playing a completely different game. The stage was set for the most devastating reality check in high society history. Isabella thought she was about to have her coronation night. Instead, she was walking into her own public execution. And the most beautiful part, she was so confident, so sure of her victory, that she was about to orchestrate her own downfall with a precision that would make Shakespeare weep. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who lets you think you've already won. The Sterling Foundation Gala was the kind of event where a single invitation could make or break your social standing in the city. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and the guest list read like a who's who of power and influence. This was Isabella's night to shine, her moment to cement her place as the city's newest power couple royalty. When Vivian Torres walked through those grand entrance doors, you could literally feel the energy in the room shift. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Here was the woman everyone thought had been cast aside, showing up to what many considered her replacement's debut as the new Mrs. Sterling in everything but name. Vivian looked absolutely stunning, not in the flashy look-at-me way that Isabella favored, but with an understated elegance that whispered rather than screamed. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made you lean in rather than step back. She didn't need to announce her presence. Everyone felt it anyway. Isabella, meanwhile, was practically glowing with anticipation. She'd been working the room all evening, making sure everyone noticed her diamond bracelet, her designer gown, her perfectly styled hair. She kept one eye on the entrance, waiting for this exact moment. When she spotted Vivian, I swear I could see the predatory smile spread across her face. The silent auction was in full swing when Isabella made her move. She'd been watching Vivian quietly bidding on various items. A weekend at a vineyard, a painting by a local artist, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. That's when Isabella saw her opening, her chance to publicly establish the hierarchy once and for all. Well, well, Isabella's voice carried just loud enough for nearby guests to hear as she approached Vivian's table. Still trying to buy your way back into relevance, I see. The conversations around them started to die down. Nothing draws a crowd like the promise of drama between two women who used to share the same man. Vivian looked up calmly, her expression neutral, almost curious. Isabella, she replied simply, her voice steady as stone. But Isabella was just getting started. She'd been planning this moment, rehearsing it in her mind. This was her chance to publicly claim her territory, to make sure everyone understood exactly where things stood. You know, Vivian, Isabella continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy, I really think it's time you found your own events to attend. This constant hovering around David's life is honestly a little embarrassing. For you, I mean. The circle of observers was growing now. Phones were discreetly pulled from the purses. This was about to become the social media event of the season. I mean, let's be honest here. Isabella's voice was getting stronger, more confident with each word. David's moved on. We all have. Don't you think it's time you did the same instead of clinging to a life that's no longer yours? Vivian simply nodded thoughtfully, as if she was actually considering Isabella's words. Her calm was almost unnerving. Here was a woman being publicly humiliated, and she looked like she was listening to a weather report. You got your settlement, didn't you? Isabella pressed on, mistaking Vivian's silence for weakness. So why are you still here? Still trying to insert yourself into David's world? Into my world? The crowd was holding its collective breath. This wasn't just drama anymore. This was a public execution. Isabella was dismantling what everyone believed was Vivian's desperate attempt to maintain relevance in a world that had already replaced her. What none of them knew was that they were watching the wrong woman fall. The silence that followed Isabella's final words was deafening. You could practically hear hearts beating as the crowd waited for Vivian's response, for her to either crumble or fight back. But Vivian did neither. She simply smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sad smile, but something that looked almost like relief. That's when David Sterling stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. Now, David wasn't the type of man who commanded attention through volume or dramatics. He was the kind of person who could make an entire room go silent just by clearing his throat. When he tapped the microphone twice, every conversation died instantly. Even Isabella turned toward him, her face glowing with anticipation. This had to be it, her moment of public validation. Good evening, everyone. David's voice carried that smooth confidence that had made him billions. I hope you are all enjoying tonight's celebration of the Sterling Foundation's incredible work this year. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Isabella beamed, probably imagining this was her cue to join him on stage as his co-host, his partner, his everything. Before we continue with tonight's auction, David continued, his eyes scanning the room with laser precision, I need to address something that's been weighing on my mind. There seems to be some confusion about my personal life, and I believe it's time to set the record straight. The room went from quiet to absolutely dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on those marble floors. Many of you have been operating under the assumption that Vivian and I divorced 2 years ago. I can understand why you might think that. We've been living separately, We've been handling our business affairs independently, and yes, we've both been seen with other people. Isabella's smile faltered just slightly. Where was this going? However, David's voice took on a tone that every person in that room recognized as the voice of a man about to drop a bombshell. What you don't know is that our divorce was never actually finalized. The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. Phones that had been discreetly recording Isabella's earlier performance were now openly pointed at David, capturing every word. Due to the complex nature of our business holdings and some, shall we say, strategic legal considerations involving ongoing litigation, Vivian and I remain legally married. We have been for the past 2 years, and we continue to be tonight. I wish I could describe the look on Isabella's face at that moment. It was like watching someone's entire reality crumble in real time. The confident smirk melted away, replaced by confusion, then horror, then something that looked like panic. The Sterling Foundation, David continued, his voice steady as a rock, remains the joint property of myself and my wife, Vivian Torres Sterling. She has been the silent partner managing our legal affairs while we've worked through some complicated business restructuring. The crowd's attention swiveled back to Vivian, who was still sitting calmly at her table, watching the proceedings with what could only be described as serene composure. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't shocked. She knew this was coming. As for Ms. Whitmore, David's voice took on a cooler tone. She has been employed by the Sterling Foundation as an event coordinator. Her services, effective immediately, are no longer required. The room erupted, not in applause, not in cheers, but in the kind of shocked murmur that happens when everyone realizes they've been watching the wrong movie entirely. Isabella stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Everything she'd said, every claim she'd made, every moment of superiority she'd enjoyed, it had all been based on a lie she'd told herself so convincingly that she'd believed it was truth. The woman she'd just publicly humiliated wasn't the discarded ex-wife. She was still the wife. The moment David's words sank in, you could watch Isabella's world collapse in real time. It was like seeing a house of cards fall in slow motion, each realization hitting her harder than the last. Her face went through a spectrum of emotions that would have been almost comical if it weren't so devastating to witness. That's not possible, Isabella stammered, her voice cracking for the first time all evening. The confident socialite who had been holding court just minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked utterly lost. David, you told me we've been together for... But David's expression was stone-cold professional now. Miss Whitmore, you were hired to coordinate events for the foundation. Any personal relationship you believed existed was a misunderstanding on your part. The crowd was absolutely riveted. Phones were capturing every second of what had to be the most spectacular social downfall anyone had ever witnessed. Isabella looked around desperately, searching faces for someone, anyone who might validate her version of reality. But the dinners, she continued, her voice getting higher, more desperate. The galas, the trips, the jewelry you bought me. Business expenses? David replied with the kind of calm that only comes from telling the absolute truth. Reimbursements for your work coordinating events. Everything was properly documented and filed with our accounting department. That's when it hit everyone in the room, including Isabella herself, just how thoroughly she had constructed an entire fantasy. Every romantic dinner had been a business meeting. Every piece of jewelry had been compensation for work performed. Every photo she'd posted on social media showing off her relationship had been her posing with her employer. The whispers started immediately. People were pulling out their phones, not just to record what was happening now, but to scroll back through Isabella's social media, seeing all her posts about being David's girlfriend through this new, devastating lens. Vivian finally stood up from her table. The grace with which she moved was almost supernatural, like a queen who had never actually left her throne, just let someone else think they were sitting on it for a while. I think, Vivian said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room, we should let Ms. Whitmore gather her things and leave with dignity. Even in her moment of complete vindication, Vivian was offering mercy. but Isabella was too far gone to accept it gracefully. This is impossible. Isabella's voice was shrill now, desperate. Everyone here has seen us together. They know we're a couple. David, tell them this is some kind of mistake. But David just shook his head. Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be processed and sent to your address on file. As security approached, Isabella made one last desperate play. She turned to the crowd, to the phone still recording, to the faces that had watched her humiliate Vivian just minutes earlier. Don't you see what this is? She cried out. This is her manipulating him. This is her playing victim to win him back. You all saw what she used to be like. Jealous, controlling, desperate. But the crowd had already moved on. They weren't looking at Isabella anymore. They were looking at Vivian and David, watching as he walked over to his wife, his actual, legal wife, and offered her his arm. The two of them stood together for the first time in public in 2 years, and suddenly everything made sense. The way they moved in sync, the subtle glances they'd been sharing all evening, the fact that Vivian had never seemed truly defeated, just patient. As Isabella was quietly escorted toward the exit, I watched her realize that she hadn't just lost a job or a relationship she'd imagined. She'd lost her entire social standing in a single moment. Every person in that room would remember this night, and they'd remember exactly who Isabella Whitmore really was. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock you down. Sometimes it completely rewrites your story. What Isabella learned that night is something we all need to remember. The most dangerous assumptions are the ones we make about other people's pain. She saw Vivian's quiet dignity and mistook it for defeat. She saw David's professional distance and assumed it meant romantic availability. She built an entire identity on a foundation of wishful thinking and willful delusion. Vivian never had to fight back because she was never actually losing. While Isabella was busy playing house and posting photos, Vivian was quietly handling million-dollar legal strategies and protecting assets worth more than most small countries' GDP. She wasn't the bitter ex-wife. She was the brilliant attorney who knew exactly how to play the long game. Sometimes the person who stays silent isn't weak. They're just waiting for the truth to speak for itself. And when it finally does, the sound is absolutely devastating. That's real karma, patient, precise, and perfectly timed.